Right, well, I think many of you probably guessed that this was coming next, but indeed, here they are. Every Beyond Bankai form introduced as part of the mobile game Bleach Brave Souls' tie-in with the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You. Much like the Espada's Beyond Resurrección before them, these alternate universe forms debuted in the game and continued to demonstrate Brave Souls' ability to do something cool with the franchise, something outside the confines of canon that's only really possible in the medium of games. The idea behind these forms is similar to that of Beyond Resurrección. Here, these particular Shinigami have all acquired a nebulous power that's greater than Bankai. While not necessarily an actual evolution of Bankai itself, each of these forms seems to fuse the Shinigami with their Zanpakuto, or some equivalent, at least, in a way that is reminiscent of Ichigo's final Getsuga Tensho. Once again, these new alternate universe forms represent Bleach Brave Souls' ability to go beyond the conventional and actually give fans something that I think they were really excited to see. What makes the Beyond Bankai forms even more interesting than the Espada's Beyond Resurrección forms, at least in my opinion, is that some of these feel like they could conceivably happen within the Bleach universe. That being said, when it comes to the actual designs themselves, I think they are a bit uneven. As a group, they are definitely more up and down than the Beyond Resurrección in regards to quality and inspiration, but we'll take a look at all of that today. So, what's the deal with these forms? What do they symbolize, and which is best? And which is the worst, too? In today's video, as a follow-up to our previous video celebrating the 10th anniversary of Bleach Brave Souls, we're going to take a look at the Shinigami's mysterious, all-powerful, so-called Beyond Bankai forms, where they ascertain perhaps the greatest power known to Shinigami. Before we get started on the video, guys, there will be some spoilers for the remainder of the 1000-Year Blood War arc that's still to come, so make sure you're aware of that. And also, if you haven't done already, consider hitting subscribe to push the channel towards its next major milestone of 300,000 subs. I really would appreciate your help. And over on my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, I just released a pretty big, almost 40-minute video looking at the game Stellar Blade. And while I think it's a great game, I personally didn't end up loving it. I'd really appreciate you checking that video out. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. Maybe giving it a like, letting me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and hitting subscribe over there as well if you like what you see. I really would appreciate all of your support. But now, without any further ado, let's get on with the video. So, like the Espada before them, a large number of the captains received one of these special forms in the game, including characters who are no longer a part of the Gotei 13, like Kisuke and Yoruichi, for example, or characters that have died, like Gin and Tōsen. That being said, on the flip side, I am a little disappointed that so many characters didn't receive one here. I feel like Renji and Ikkaku should have been absolute shoo-ins to receive a Beyond Bankai form each, and I'm a little surprised, though less so, that Rukia didn't get one either. The same goes for the Vizard captains Kensei and Rose, though I'm admittedly less surprised that they were left out in the cold. Rose's Beyond Bankai form would be absolutely incredible, though, I'm sure of it. I wondered if maybe characters like Rukia didn't receive one due to her Bankai having not been revealed in the anime yet at this point in time, and perhaps more importantly, due to the game not having the full 1000-Year Blood War arc license. So maybe they couldn't even hint at Bankai to come. But then Kisuke received a form, and it quite clearly cribs from his actual canon Bankai, so they can't be the reasons. Instead, it just seems like the game wanted to avoid touching any character that wasn't at least a captain, save for Ichigo anyway. On the plus side, should they ever decide to return to this concept, there's a bunch of characters still left to include. Now, when compared with the Beyond Resurrección forms, the Beyond Bankai forms, in my opinion, don't have quite as obvious a through-line connection between them all. Where every single one of the Beyond Resurrección forms features the Hogyoku in some way, often accompanied by cracks and splits in the characters' very bodies that pulse with light and their hollow mask remnants are now turned to flames, the Beyond Bankai forms don't really share any design elements between them like that, save for the simple fact that they all represent the Shinigami Zanpakuto in some way. Well, most of them do anyway. Some of these forms get a little abstract, again in comparison to the overall more clear-cut, thematic Espada transformations. Like the Beyond Resurrección before them, however, I think some of these do have a tendency to be over-designed, but on the whole, I think they all look pretty good for the most part, with only a few that don't really work for me. Let's begin with the head captain, Yamamoto, whose Beyond Bankai form is surprisingly simplistic. But then, maybe I should have anticipated this. After all, the initial form of his Bankai Zanka no Tachi is purposefully low-key and small-scale, only to turn into something truly monstrous later on. The in-game lore states that with Yamamoto's whole body wreathed in flames, he uses both his fists to control any situation. Honestly, we're starting things off with the winner in my opinion. Yamamoto looks awesome here, even if he's maybe a little on the too simple side. The design changes are minimal, and it is a little weird that the description states his entire body is wreathed in flame, when in actuality it's only his arm. But yeah, let's start there because that is a great design element. Yamamoto's missing arm has been replaced with one made entirely of searing flames, while the multitude of scars running along his battle-hardened body are all glowing simultaneously as though lava flows beneath his skin. His ultimate ability, Yoko no Sokots, meaning double bones of melting kalpa, is of course a reference to his immense Hakuda ability, Sokots, which he uses to instantly kill Wonder Weiss in the manga. Upon activating this power, Yamamoto stomps his foot into the ground, cratering the floor beneath him and flooding the battlefield with lava, while his arms are engulfed in fire before he blasts his foe. Again, it's an awesome looking form. It's simple, but it is mighty, giving Yamamoto the appearance of a godly fighter, whose body is scorched and blackened by his own power. It's an interesting form, in the sense that it doesn't really have much to do with his Bankai, but is instead leaning into mixing the flames of Ryujin Jaka with Yamamoto's fabled Hakuda proficiency. Alright, we're only on the second character, and already things are getting weird. When it was revealed that Yoruichi would be receiving a Beyond Bankai form, the same question was really on everyone's lips. How is that going to work? Yoruichi's Zanpakuto has never been revealed, so what motif could they possibly draw from? Shunko, perhaps? Remember, of course, that the term Beyond Bankai isn't official, and so technically these forms don't need to have anything to do with Zanpakuto at all, it's just in most cases they do. But these forms are simply the Shinigami after achieving a power greater than Bankai. What that power is completely up for interpretation. And so, with that information in mind, the Brave Souls team took a rather interesting approach with Yoruichi's form and instead leaned into her position as the former head of one of the Soul Society's foremost aristocratic families. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the in-game lore doesn't have much to say, merely stating this outfit resembles what she wore when she was princess of the Shihoin clan and Soi Fon superior. And it absolutely does. It looks very similar to that gold and yellow gown, the outfit we see Yoruichi wearing in Soi Fon's flashback, except slightly modified for battle purposes now. The weapon in Yoruichi's hand is a brilliant gold blade that bears the Shihoin family crest on it, and is likely a piece of heavenly equipment, the Tenshi Heiso, similar to the Shihoin shield that is used to destroy the Sokyoku and the heavenly tools that Yushiro brings with him to assist the Gotei in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, all of which the Shihoin clan are charged with defending. In her special move, Yoruichi flies using her Ryukotsujo as seen in the Soul Society arc before unleashing a glittering golden arc from her sword. Moving on, we have a slightly more conventional and clear-cut design in Soi Fon's Beyond Bankai form, which literally transforms her into Suzumibachi itself. In this form, there is very little trace of Soi Fon's actual Bankai, Jakuho Raiko Ben, and likely for good reason. We know she's not a fan of it at all. Though that does make me wonder how she would even go about attaining this form in the first place, since you'd have to assume that this power, in Soi Fon's case considering the similarities, comes from her Zanpakuto. So that feels like a bit of a paradox to me almost. Maybe Soi Fon showing affection to just her Shikai is enough to attain this power. Either way, in this form she wields a massive armoured version of her Shikai that engulfs her entire arm, while a gold shield floats in front of her other arm. Soi Fon wears armoured plating on her waist and legs, and gains tufts of fur around her neck and wrists. Portions of her Bankai's visor can be seen on either side of her head, while her hair trails off into luminous crimson butterfly wings, reminiscent of her homonka. So yeah, this form is definitely taking more of an inspiration from her Shikai, though there is a tiny sliver of her Bankai involved. I'm not sure how I feel about this form, to be totally honest. It feels a bit all over the place. Now, admittedly, I do like it when these forms so clearly look like the Shinigami has evolved into and fused with their actual Zanpakuto, but this one looks a little messy to me, like there are bits and pieces all over the place and they don't really unify all that well, but I do love the red homonka in her hair. That's an awesome detail. As we can see from her special move within the game, Suiran Jakusetsu, meaning finishing chaos of deadly killing stings, Soi Fon's Beyond Bankai form facilitates a greater use of her Shikai, which I do really like. Simply by kicking, she generates a homonka in the sky, and then her shield can actually be thrown to create another homonka which she can then pierce with her giant weapon, effectively removing the need for striking someone twice. Gin's Beyond Bankai form is very interesting indeed. I absolutely love the colour scheme of silver, white, grey and blue. To me it's very visually appealing. Of course, Gin is wearing his Waco Mundo outfit here, so I have to wonder how it would look were he wearing his Shinigami uniform instead. Atop his usual outfit, Gin now has a massive thick fur collar, as well as a pair of oversized blue-tipped fox ears on either side of his head. Armor plating runs down his arms, trailing off into snake-like ribbons, each one containing a single icy blue eye at the tip that then come together to form a snake's glare. That same armor plating hangs from Gin's waist as well. From the fur around his shoulders, a massive plume of silvery hair flows behind him, taking the shape of a fox's tail. In my opinion, it's a sleek, fantastic design that combines two of Gin's most prominent themes, the fox and the cold-blooded snake. Perhaps most curiously of all, however, a strange purple orb can be seen embedded within a necklace dangling upon Gin's chest. Is this supposed to be the Hogyoku? I mean, this sure doesn't look to me like a Hogyoku enhanced form, so is this simply Gin if he successfully destroyed Aizen and stole the Hogyoku from him, but maybe didn't use it, perhaps somehow still leading him to greater power? The in-game lore states that even revived, his soul is driven by only one goal. So, like Baragon before him, this is a version of Gin who was resurrected from the dead, maybe using the Hogyoku to do so. It's very cool how the serpentine armor on his shoulders moves and slithers, rising up like a snake, and in his special move Kodoku no Tanga, or Rent Fang of Vulpine Venom, we see another of the form's influences. Gin's own Bankai, Kamishini no Yari, and therefore by extension, Rangiku. By swiping his sword in front of him, Gin conjures a path of glittering dust, reminiscent of Hainako's ash, filled with the poisoned shards of his blade, which then infects his opponent. Up next we have another winner in my books. Unohana's Beyond Bankai form is really quite haunting, and again totally leans into her character as she appears in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. In this form, it's as though her Shikai Minazuki has been dismantled and gouged out, draped over Unohana like a sickening cloak. This form perfectly teases the two sides to her nature, in my opinion. The heavy green robe gives her an almost priestly appearance, but there is just so much wrong with this picture. On the underside of the robe, just hidden from view, we can see that it's essentially just flesh and skin that she's wearing, full of veins and blood, while Minazuki's soul yellow eye is suspended behind her within a bloody construct. Unohana's hair is another clever aspect to this design. Although it looks like she's wearing it down as Yachiru Unohana, in reality it isn't quite so. We can see the hair almost has a life of its own as it entangles itself into the shape of Retsu's braid before splitting off into 2 points like a stingray's barbed tails. The red of the tails flows through Unohana's hair like blood, showing that it's all mixed into one. In this form, Unohana wields a sword made entirely of, you guessed it, blood, and in her special move Jihinaru Gokusai Shiki, or Merciful Splendor, Unohana offers her hand to her foe with a warm smile, but as the screen turns dark, the stingers suddenly assault the viewer, impaling them and forcing them to the ground. They can then only watch as her hair literally absorbs their blood before it's spread throughout her cloak and then from the great eye behind her, Unohana floating in the air as glowing veins fill the sky, eventually producing vicious spikes like thorns to finish off her enemy. It's gruesome, it's sinister and evil, and I love it. Unohana quite literally is a rose amongst thorns at the end of this special move. This is a great looking form with a very thematically appropriate power, and the in-game lore notes that just for a moment, her secret desires are unleashed. Now, this next one is a little difficult, and I wasn't even sure whether to include him or not, but Aizen's new form definitely has similarities with the Beyond Bankai lineup, even if there are some considerable differences too. In this form, Aizen looks godlier than ever, with flowing hair and dark purple eyes. A third eye, like the one seen in his butterflies and form, appears on his forehead, while glowing purple cracks run from the ends of his eyes and down his face. Much of Aizen's humanity appears to be completely gone in this form. His body, which is now formed of an elegant black and white robe, opens in the centre to reveal nothing but a cosmic purple energy enshrining the Hogyoku itself. But it's not just the Hogyoku. The orb itself seems to have evolved, now taking on a star-like formation. The way Aizen's body opens up like this to reveal a purple void inside is of course very similar, if not an outright reference, to his cocoon form, which when broken open, looked very similar. Interestingly, Aizen's arms are now separated from his torso, and inside them, we can again see that same starry cosmic power. Floating behind him are 6 mirrored wings, presenting on the surface a beautiful sheen, but on the other side, we can see those same ugly, sinister eyes that appeared on the wings of Aizen's monstrous Hogyoku transformation. So yeah, this is a tricky, albeit awesome form. Is this a Beyond Bankai form, or a Hogyoku enhanced form? I think the key here, of course, is that it's clearly both. A perfect fusion that transcends everything. In the story of Bleach, Aizen famously fused with the Hogyoku, but he also fused with his Zanpakuto as well, and this is the end point of those fusions coming together in one perfect, almighty way. The in-game lore states as much, saying it's a form born from the fusion of the Hogyoku's power and the power of his Zanpakuto, Kyoka Suigetsu, and that he smiles as he reaches for new heights beyond the heavens. Beyond the heavens is an interesting phrase here too. The separation of Aizen's arms from his torso absolutely feels like it's meant to evoke imagery reminiscent of Ryo himself. I love the purple cracks running from his eyes, and to be honest, I kind of wish his actual transformations in the manga had something akin to that. The closest we got was the kind of purple veiny collar on the butterflies and form, and I always quite liked that. Aizen's ultimate move, Mugen Hoka, meaning illusion-shattering flower, sees him imprisoning his enemy within a world of mirrors and tricks, almost trapping them within a different dimension entirely under his control, before Aizen collapses the dimension in the palm of his hand, shattering the mirrors to end the fight immediately. It's a great form, and one I'm definitely a big fan of. Up next is Aizen's former captain, Shinji, whose Beyond Bankai form is again quite interesting. Now, Shinji's is probably the first form so far to truly verge on being over-designed in my opinion, but perhaps that is on purpose, as the form clearly represents two halves of the same man, both being showcased at once. Shinji is the only Vizard captain to receive a form like this, but we can glean some insight into how forms for both Rose and Kensei may have looked thanks to his design. Here, Shinji's base look is mostly unchanged, but it is clearly divided into two halves. On one side, Shinji retains his Shinigami appearance, but his hand is now covered in hollow-like armor. His Zanpakuto Sakanade looks the same, but the ring of his Shikai is now surrounded by petals of pink energy that I think are supposed to reference his Bankai Sakashima Yokoshima Happo Fusagari. However, it's on the other side where things start to get truly elaborate. Here, Shinji's hollowification takes over, covering much of his body with hollow armor that runs down his arm and side, overlaying his captain's Hayori in bone-white ribbons. A quarter of his face is covered with a slightly altered version of his hollow mask, while his hair has grown out massively on this same side as well, resembling his long hair from 100 years ago. The hollow mask loops over his head and reaches down his back, separating out into black and red strands that are capped off with rings, again reminiscent of his Zanpakuto, indicating a complete fusion between his hollow and Shinigami powers. Shinji's other hand is also hollow-like in appearance, but his fingers are now black with red claws. To cap everything off, Shinji's skin has become a deathly pale white, and flaming red and black Reiatsu ebbs from an opening in the armor on his shoulder and a huge white ring atop his hand, though this flaming Reiatsu doesn't quite look the same in my opinion as the Reiatsu found in the Beyond Resurrección forms. So yeah, it's definitely a bit messy, but again, maybe that's the point. The in-game lore simply states that Shinji exerts all the power at his command to get the job done, so implying both Shinigami and Hollow power, while his ultimate move, Sakeima Dowashi Senkoho, meaning reversed puzzling flash cannon, sees him reversing the situation while also revealing a negative version of himself split down the middle. A ring of crackling black and red power forms behind him, and from it several rods emerge, gathering streams of energy together to create one gigantic Sero-like blast. Moving on though, we now come to a Beyond Bankai form that absolutely is not over-designed, and is in fact one of the cleanest, strongest designs of the entire set, in my opinion anyway. Byakuya's transformation, one of the first we ever saw. Yes, much like Ulquiorra before him, Byakuya, alongside Ichigo, was released much earlier than the rest of these as a sort of test bed, this time to celebrate the game's 5th anniversary, and this form looks immaculate. Byakuya mostly looks exactly like himself, save for the fact that he is clothed in the angelic appearance of his Shukei Hakuteken, his Zanpakuto's ultimate technique. Byakuya's captain's Hayori has been replaced by this silky, feathery, pale purple and white gown, which seems to be made from the very energy of Shukei Hakuteken itself. From the top of the gown, a flowing fur collar leads into a pair of massive white wings connected by a single ring, while Byakuya's Kensei Kan has been transformed into a pair of wispy strands of white power. Perhaps the coolest detail, however, is the ornament that clasps his cloak in place across his chest. It's reminiscent of the design of his aristocratic appearance when he first extended Rukia an invitation to join the Kuchiki clan. Of course, in his hand, Byakuya wields the fiery white blade of Shukei Hakuteken, but interestingly in gameplay, Byakuya's primary means of attacking is a set of 6 glowing white swords that float beside him, reminiscent of Senkei. I mean, this is just a brilliant looking form, and absolutely what I would have imagined the captains fusing with their Zanpakuto to look like. It's simple, but it's obvious that he's draped in his power, and the in-game lore states as such, noting that this is Byakuya's appearance when he is clothed in the power of Shukei Hakuteken, a special Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi technique. His special ability, Bokei Kyoga Hakuteken, meaning Hopescape, White Imperial Sword of Graceful Pride, is simple but effective. Byakuya transforms the power of his 6 floating swords into one all-powerful blade that he clasps in his hand before soaring forwards, carving through the air with a brilliant white stroke that ends in a ring of light eclipsing the battlefield. Up next is another of my absolute favourite designs from this set, Sajin's Beyond Bankai form, which again looks almost exactly like how I would envision a transformation like this. In fact, back in 2014, while the manga was still ongoing, so a good 6 years or so before this form debuted in the game, I drew something akin to this, based on this very idea, that Sajin managed to fuse with his Zanpakuto in a manner akin to Ichigo's final Getsuga Tensho, and was wearing the armour of his Bankai, because it just makes so much sense. But here in the game, I mean, it just looks incredible. They took it to the next level. Komamura himself looks mostly the same, except he's now absolutely hulking and shredded, even more so than usual. But of course the most prominent change is that his fur is now a blistering red, matching the skin colour of his Zanpakuto spirit Tenken. And Komamura looks as though he's now embodying Tenken itself, wearing much of his Bankai's armour upon his shoulders and forearms, the heavenly ropes of Kokujo Tengen Myo also wrapped around him, while a single yellow ribbon is entangled within. Fire now erupts from Komamura's mouth and ears, while his mane trails off, becoming much longer and tipped with streams of ferocious flame also. In another very cool detail, it's not just Tenken that Komamura is embodying here, but Yamamoto as well. The very way in which Komamura is now wearing his tattered Shihakusho around his waist, of course references the head captain as he readies for battle. The in-game lore states that with loyalty in his heart, he crosses swords with his deceased friend to defend the Serete, which is awesome. Sajin's ultimate move is Gino Isaizan, which means Righteous Strike, and with this ability Sajin takes on not only the appearance but the size and scale of his Bankai too, growing absolutely massive as he towers over the battlefield before dragging his colossal blade along the ground, rupturing the earth beneath his feet and sending an enormous shockwave barreling towards his foe. Kyōraku's Beyond Bankai form is a tricky one for me. Despite being my favourite captain, I'm not sure how I feel about it. It feels a little underwhelming for such an evocative and theatrical figure, but at the same time I was praising other designs earlier for not going overboard. Yet I can't help but feel like if you're going to go over the top and be flamboyant, then Kyōraku is the character to do it with. In a sense, it almost feels like they weren't sure how to successfully embody a Zanpakuto as conceptual as Katen Gyokotsu, and I sympathise with that. In this form, Kyōraku looks mostly the same as normal, but Katen's headdress is now dangling in front of him, suspended by purple ribbons that loop over his shoulders. Behind Kyōraku floats an intricate pattern, a weaving of pink energy that vaguely resemble the bones of Katen's headdress, while the lower half of his Hayori is made up entirely of a patchwork of pink energy as well. The in-game lore notes that bedecked in an outfit of glorious splendour, Kyōraku sets out to protect the Soul Society. One thing that's very cool about this form though is that the team went to great effort to give him a variety of totally new children's games to wield, as in his gameplay he now utilises Temari, a variation of Taka-Oni that seems to reference King of the Hill, and stone skipping, while his ultimate ability is the game Kagome Kagome, here meaning encircling woven bamboo pattern, but it's actually based on a Japanese children's game where one child, the Oni, sits on the ground and closes their eyes while the other children move around them in a circle and sing a song, before the child in the centre has to guess who is standing behind them. In Kyōraku's special move, we see that take shape as the patchwork portion of his Hayori unravels and flies into the air before enclosing the victim within, starting the game. Kyōraku merges into a crowd of shadowy figures as the victim attempts to search for him, only to be stabbed through the back. Moving on, and we've got ourselves another good one. A little like Zomari before him, I possibly prefer Tōsen's Beyond Bankai form to his actual Resurrección from the manga, though unlike Zomari's Resurrección, I think Tōsen's is still pretty cool nonetheless. Interestingly, the in-game lore here specifically notes that Tōsen has unlocked a power greater than both Bankai and Resurrección, implying this is absolutely his strongest form. And he looks incredibly cool here too, considerably more humanoid than his actual Resurrección. Tōsen's transformation embodies aspects of both his Bankai and his Resurrección, though fittingly his holification is absolutely more prominent. The giant, twisted, ornate horns that once protruded from his Resurrección's back have now formed a white hollow mask helmet upon his head, combined with the single slit design of his original hollow mask as well. The hollow mask armour that he obtained in that form is also present here too on his chest, but his shoulders are now covered in a thick, black fur that stretches down his arms too, his hands becoming animalistic and monstrous. The lower half of his body is almost completely bestial in appearance, while cricket-like wings extend from his waist. The only real symbol of his Zanpakuto, of his Shinigami self, are the 9 rings found scattered along his body, the same 9 rings that are used to conjure his Bankai, Suzumushi Suishiki Enma Koragi, though even these have been corrupted and now have spikes protruding from them. According to the game, he launches an attack against the Shinigami, his revived soul possessed by the desire for revenge, and we know from Sajin's that he faces him down once again. His ultimate move, Onkyo Kyurin, the Rings of Vengeance, sees the rings on Tōsen's body surround and swirl around him before glowing with a powerful green light. As they take on an intricate formation, the rings unleash a devastating shockwave similar to Tōsen's ability, Los Nuevos Aspectos. Hitsugaya's Beyond Bankai form takes on a more regal appearance, drastically altering the look of his Bankai's wings, most obviously of all. Where he once bore a pair of huge, curved ice wings, he now has 4 thinner, sharper wings that float behind him and are no longer actually connected to his body. Hitsugaya's icy collar has been trimmed down and turned upwards, while his face is now flanked on either side by a pair of draconic horns, which are in fact a part of his actual physical body, the ice forming on his very skin. The green sash that he used to wear around his torso now floats behind him like a ring while extending downwards too, the bottom half of the sash now made entirely of ice. Interestingly, he now also seems to be wearing blue armour beneath his shahakusho that doesn't really resemble the rest of his Beyond Bankai in that it actually seems to be made of material rather than ice. However, the design of this armour is reminiscent of Hyorin Maru's underbelly, a clear sign that Hitsugaya has fused with his Zanpakuto spirit in some way. Perhaps the coolest design element of the lot, however, is the use of crimson throughout. From the massive crimson flowers hanging behind the captain to the crimson ice he can conjure, all of it is a reference to the very name of his Bankai itself, Daiguren Hyorin Maru, which means Grand Crimson Lotus Ice Ring. The in-game lore states that Hitsugaya stands poised to protect those he holds dear with his well-refined skills, while his ultimate ability Ryoran Hyoren, meaning profusion of icy lotus blossoms, drops ice into the ground, which then sprouts crimson-tipped icy buds from the earth. Drawing his claws along his blade and turning it a brilliant red by doing so, Hitsugaya awakens the field of buds, and they open with an explosion of piercingly sharp ice spikes. Honestly, this form doesn't do a lot for me. Again, it feels a bit messy, but it's cool enough. It feels like there are also potentially some references to Hitsugaya's completed Bankai in here too. For example, the smaller, thinner floating wings do look reminiscent of how the wings appear behind adult Hitsugaya, and the way ice hangs from the hem of his Hayori looks similar to how ice clings to Hitsugaya's tattered jacket in that form also. And so now we come to what is in my opinion the weakest Beyond Bankai form of the lot, in terms of design anyway. I totally get what they were going for with Kenpachi's appearance here, but I just don't think they quite pulled off the execution, and as a result, Kenpachi looks kind of goofy and all over the place. The in-game lore notes that by fighting with two blades instead of just one, he finds a new enjoyment in battle, and I guess that's true, he looks happy enough. In this form, Kenpachi's design takes clear inspiration from Yachiru's own power of Sanpo Kenju, which conjures two creatures to fight by her side, Lumpy and Bony, each of whom wields their own blades. Weirdly though, since Yachiru is Kenpachi's Bankai spirit in reality, that means Lumpy and Bony are actually creations of Kenpachi's own endless power, so I guess he's just wearing his own power anyway, in a sense, even though we only ever saw it interact with Yachiru. But the connection to Yachiru is great and makes a lot of sense here. Kenpachi looks almost unchanged, save for his arms. His right arm references Lumpy, and his shoulder is consumed by an immense amount of dark fur, while the actual arm itself is covered in yellow fur, akin to how Lumpy looks. In his hand, Kenpachi wields a variation of Lumpy's meat cleaver. Kenpachi's left arm references Bony, and is covered in a white skeletal armor which has blue cracks running through it. Again, in his hand, Kenpachi clasps a variation of Bony's wicked-looking skeletal sword, and, well, that's really about it. Kenpachi's hair is also a weird fusion now of his two different hairstyles, and it just doesn't look good. The front of his hair is split into pronounced spikes, as is seen in the Soul Society and Rankar arcs, while the back portion flows freely, as seen after the time skip. It's just a messy design all round in my opinion. The idea to incorporate Lumpy and Bony makes sense, but they don't fit well together here. I like that his special move, Nito Shinzui, meaning Twin Blade Apotheosis, seems to actually incorporate the triple slash effect of Yachiru's Sanpo Kenju, as we see 3 slashes of pink, blue, and yellow obliterate a mountain. Leaping through the air, Kenpachi unleashes streams of blue and yellow energy from his two swords before a third and final strike of pink power decimates the ground behind him. It's kind of neat, I guess, but I would have liked to have seen, as conventional as it may be, a play on Kenpachi's Shikai or Bankai instead. And up next we have another transformation that I'm not necessarily sold on, though I don't hate it either. Mayuri's Beyond Bankai form transforms Ashisogi Jizo itself more than it does Mayuri, which possibly makes some sense, and I like that the Zanpakuto spirit is incorporated into the design, floating behind Mayuri at all times. And that in itself is a neat little similarity to Kisuke's upcoming Beyond Bankai form as well. Mayuri himself hasn't changed all that much. As you might have expected, though, he does now have a completely new gold headdress that resembles the wings of Ashisogi Jizo, while bells dangle from spokes on either side of his head. The same bells that once hung from the halo that encircled Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo. A new sash, formed of Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo's bug-like legs, is wrapped around Mayuri's waist, and a red cloth dangles underneath, similar in design to the cloak draped over his Bankai's shoulders. Of course, as I said earlier, Ashisogi Jizo is where the real changes can be found here. The creature is now much smaller than in Bankai, and rather than having the body of a caterpillar, it now flies using its wings, while a pair of grotesque, pincer-like appendages emerge from beneath its gown. The creature retains its bulbous golden head, but now it bears a pair of massive eyebrows that billow outwards, made up of the toxic purple smog that Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo spews from its mouth. Ashisogi Jizo is now also gnawing on a giant golden ring like a teething baby. Overall, while the design of Ashisogi Jizo is cool and suitably greatly changed, it's a shame that Mayuri himself barely looks any different, when you'd think the mad scientist would leap at the opportunity to completely evolve and alter his form. Considering Mayuri freely changes out his headdress anyway throughout the story, this doesn't really feel fittingly grandiose. This doesn't feel like a form where he's fused with his Zanpakuto. But again, as mentioned earlier, that isn't necessarily what these forms represent at all. Mayuri's new special ability is Konjiki Yaya Jirashi, meaning Golden Child's Tease, and is invoked by the giant ring that Ashisogi Jizo is chewing on suddenly vanishing, reappearing around the victim and keeping them from moving, a new take on Ashisogi Jizo's paralysis. Again, emphasizing that Mayuri himself doesn't have much going on in this form, he simply leaves the victim to Ashisogi Jizo and it pounces on them before devouring them. We now move on from a couple of slightly disappointing forms to perhaps my absolute favourite of the bunch. Kisuke's Beyond Bankai form, which takes major inspiration from his Bankai Kanon Biraki Benehime Aratame, transforming the puppet master into a puppet himself. This is another design that, in my opinion, is the perfect balance of embodying the character and their Zanpakuto while keeping it clean and sleek. In this form, Kisuke himself looks almost the exact same, save for a couple of key details. Perhaps my favourite detail of the entire design is that Kisuke himself is now a puppet, as evidenced by his wrists and ankles, where the joints themselves are now separated by a glowing red energy, as though Kisuke's entire body is that of a wooden mannequin controlled from within by the power of his new form. Those same glowing red joining lines can be seen running along portions of his torso and neck too. And around his neck sits an enlarged version of the tassel and red string decoration that hangs from Benehime itself while in Shikai. However, the most obvious change, of course, comes in the form of the gigantic hand that floats behind Kisuke himself. The palm of the hand appears as a huge circle, again filled with a simmering crimson light, and the palm seems to be a construct of red rope akin to the same that is wrapped around Benehime. The individual fingers of the hand take the form of huge wooden puppet fingers, with each finger able to act independently, the tips of the fingers opening up to allow short, vicious-looking blades to be set within them. From the fingers, glowing crimson threads are woven and lacerate anything they come into contact with. The in-game lore states that Kisuke uses his resourcefulness and a giant puppet, because he just happens to have one, to aid the Seirete in its time of need. The giant puppet, of course, being a pretty overt reference to his Bankai. Kisuke's special ability Karakuri Benehime Kaikuguri, meaning Karakuri Crimson Princess Scrambling, sees the fingers of the giant hand moving creepily attached to their red threads before the hand suddenly opens up, seemingly dispelling the threads as Kisuke darts forward, the energy between his joints shining. As Kisuke comes skidding to a halt, we see that he's slashed the air behind him numerous times before pulling the puppet hand forwards, tugging on and tightening its strings as it closes its fingers around him. As the strings are tightened, the slashes Kisuke made previously are suddenly filled with blades, and interestingly, although the artwork depicts the fingers as having blades protruding from them, that's never actually seen at all during the special move. Ukitake's Beyond Bankai transformation is another interesting one, seeing as we never learned what his Bankai actually is. However, in many respects, this honestly looks like it could be a fitting Bankai for him, taking Sogyo no Kotowari to the next level in a really effective way. While his Shikai remains the same, the rope connecting the two swords has now become enormous and looms over Ukitake's head. The rope is a reference to Shimenawa found at Shinto shrines, signifying a sacred space, while dangling from the rope are various Omamori talismans. Again, the same as you'd find at a shrine or temple, designed to bring good luck and protection, which is very in keeping with Ukitake's personality, and a little bit like Unohana beforehand, gives him a priestly appearance, although his seems a little more genuine. A large, unfurled scroll rises up from underneath Ukitake's arms and over the back of his head. As Sogyo no Kotowari's name suggests, a pair of fish can also be seen swimming about the air around Ukitake. But what's most interesting about the form that we see here is that Ukitake has used it to absorb Kyōraku's ability of Kageoni, assimilating it into his own power, something that is noted within the in-game lore. And so this form of Ukitake's now presumably exists within the shadows as well, and we can see that from the way darkness now clings to him, to his white hair specifically, dipping the ends of his hair in an inky black. The talismans hanging from the rope have also been dipped in darkness, as though corrupted, and the fish of Sogyo no Kotowari are also now a shadowy black. In this form's special move called Sokoku no Awase, or Twin Blackness Joined to Kill, we can see that there does seem to be some form of corruption within Ukitake's power, as even the name of that ability does not sound like the captain we know. As Ukitake unleashes his ability, one of his shadowy fish swims along the scroll behind him, writing out an incantation in black ink. That same darkness then spreads out beneath the captain as he plunges his sword into the shadows. One of the fish then swims towards his opponent before leaping forth, breaking the water's surface and transforming back into Sogyo no Kotowari to impale any unsuspecting opponents, working in much the same way as Kageoni. Again, I think this is another great one, but I do wonder what it would look like if he hadn't absorbed Kageoni, or perhaps this form is impossible to achieve without first doing that, which seems a little random to me. And I can't help but wonder as well if the darkness on this form is also supposed to be some kind of a reference to Mimihagi and its influence over Ukitake. Finally, a little like Aizen before him, I wasn't sure whether to include Ichigo in this or not, as his form does feel quite different to the rest, but ultimately I'm not sure where else I'll get the chance to discuss this form, so here it is. According to the in-game lore, this is what Ichigo looks like when he successfully combines his Shinigami Hollow and Fullbring powers. Yet even in this form, his will to fight with and protect his friends remains the same. Here, Ichigo's hair is long and jet black, of course immediately recognizable as a callback to the final Getsuga Tensho. The top half of Ichigo's body is covered in an intricate white armor that resembles his Fullbring, while the lower half of course resembles his Bankai, specifically his Fullbring Bankai, with the Shihakusho splitting into 3 shredded tails. Meanwhile, streams of black and red Reiatsu emerge from his back like wings, perhaps a reference to his hollow powers, though mostly I think designed to act as the antithesis to Byakuya's pure white angelic wings. In his hand, Ichigo wields a new black blade that greatly resembles one of White's arms, and thus absolutely reflects his inner hollow. Personally, I've never been crazy about this form. I do think it is a bit over-designed, especially when you compare it to Byakuya, and it doesn't help that Ichigo kind of looks like he's wearing a black wig here. Ichigo has better original forms in Bleach Brave Souls, at least in my opinion. His special attack in this form is Ten-O Tozasu Taiyo, meaning Heaven Chaining Sun, and as the wings on his back fill with a red light, he lifts his sword above his head, conjuring a black and red moon of power briefly. With his wings and sword now both aflame with energy, Ichigo takes off into the sky, leaving an imprint of the Bun symbol of Tensa Zangetsu on the ground beneath him. Soaring into the air, Ichigo swings his blade and leaves an enormous streak of black power behind him that carves through the sky. And so that's all of the Shinigami's Beyond Bankai forms from Bleach Brave Souls. Like I said at the start of this video, I do genuinely like most of them, with some of them I think being really fantastic and looking like genuine evolutions of their power, while I think others are definitely over-designed and just not that great, maybe even a little goofy. And just like last time in the Beyond Resurrección video, we're going to cap this thing off with my ranking of all of the Beyond Bankai designs, which you can see right here appearing on screen now, based on the visuals, based on their designs. As you can see, for me, Kisuke came out on top, followed by Byakuya, and then Sajin, but a lot of them, especially in the top half or so, I really do think are pretty excellent. Alright guys, but that's it for today's video. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think of the Beyond Bankai forms introduced in Bleach Brave Souls? How do they stack up to the Beyond Resurrección forms in your opinion, and which is your favourite? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about it down in the comments below. Alright guys, but as we close up here, make sure to check out my second channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, and help me really get it off the ground. I would appreciate your support so very much. Like I said, I just released a very in-depth, almost 40-minute video over there for you to enjoy. enjoy, so please do check it out and maybe leave a subscribe. Also, consider hitting subscribe here on this channel as well if you haven't done already, and as always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to do this. If you want to support me over on Patreon just like these guys are, thank you very much. At the $1 a month tier, you can get your name in the credits of every single video just like this, and at the $2 tier or higher, you can enjoy all of my videos absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Alright guys, once again, thanks so very much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.